Hello, everyone. We'll give about another minute for people to join, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining today. All right, it's 101. So I'm going to share my screen. So today we are talking about garden maintenance, and I'm using a mic so you can hear me a little bit better, but it's on low battery. So if my audio cuts out, Terry, please just interrupt and give me a heads up. If you have any questions, just hold them for the end, and then we'll take all the questions at once. But otherwise, thanks for joining. We're going to talk about garden maintenance today. First thing, and one of the things that I think is most important for learning how to garden and how to get better at it every season is to know what's going on in your own garden. So you want to walk it at least weekly. I love having a map of my garden space with what I've planted where. And I like keeping a journal of what's going well, what isn't going well, if you have pests, if you have diseases, trying to figure out what they are, what's going on. So next year, you can keep track of it and maybe catch it a little earlier or figure out how to remedy it so that you can solve it before it begins. So I think this is one of the most important things to come away with. If you've got a garden, just be out there and paying attention so that you learn more as you go. Labeling your garden, especially if you're a new gardener, is super helpful. So I find this especially helpful if you're doing things from direct seed, and then you have little baby seedlings pop up. If you know exactly what you planted there, because I always say, oh, I'll remember, and then 2 weeks go by and I have no idea what I planted there. If you've labeled it, then you can go and see, does this look like sage should look like, or is it a weed and I should pull it out? And there's a ton of options to labeling your garden. You can paint some rocks. That's also very artistic and cute, and rocks are free usually, so that's pretty cool. You can make big signs. You can buy decorative ones. A lot of people do just like the regular labels you get from your nursery. They'll just put them in when they're planting. Or some people, they'll take the seed packet, especially if it's one of the glossy ones and kind of water resistant, and they'll just put it on a plastic fork outside. So really, whatever method works for you, works for you. There's a lot of options. But it just helps you know what's planted there so you can weed appropriately. And then if you're really into different varieties, because there's like hundreds of varieties of tomatoes and hundreds of varieties of peppers, you can label with the variety so at the end of the season, if you're trying out a few different ones, you can say, oh, I know I really liked this one. This one wasn't as good, so you can adjust for next year. So this is going to be a lot of science, and not all of it is super important. So plants need a lot of specific nutrients to succeed. There are macronutrients, which are nutrients that they need in high quantities, and then there are micronutrients, which are nutrients that they need in lower quantities. All of them have specific functions in the plant, and there are symptoms of deficiency. So if there isn't this nutrient present in your soil, the plant will react in a way where you can figure out what's deficient in your soil. So this, we'll share the slides after, so you don't need to read this all over now. But there's 2 slides with the nutrient, the symbol, so that's the chemical symbol that you'd find on the periodic table, what it does in the plant, whether or not it's mobile. So that's whether or not it can move from one part of the plant to the other. So for example, if it's a mobile nutrient, you will see the symptoms of a deficiency on the old growth because it will be present in the old growth. And then as it puts new growth out, it'll prioritize that new growth. So the nitrogen would move from the bottom set of leaves to the top set of leaves. So if you see yellowing on the top set of leaves, you're not deficient in nitrogen. You're probably deficient in something else. If it's immobile, you'll see symptoms on the new growth because the plant couldn't move that nutrient to where it wanted to. And then if you see the term intraveinal chlorosis, chlorosis is a fancy term for yellowing. Intraveinal chlorosis means between those plant veins is where it's yellowing. So that's just a fancy word, and I wanted to show you a picture of what that looks like. So you can see there's a lot of different things, and a lot of the symptoms will look kind of similar. You can see intraveinal chlorosis is on a lot of them. So this is a lot of information, and we'll come back to in a second. But I also want to talk to you about cation exchange capacity. So most nutrients are available to plants only in soluble form. That means that they have to be dissolved in water for the plants to be able to use them. So if you have really, really dry soil and you're not watering often, you may have a nutrient deficiency just because there isn't a soluble form of the nutrient for the plant to uptake. And the way I explain this to people is if you think about if you put sugar cubes in your coffee, you won't taste the sugar if the sugar doesn't dissolve. So you have to have a soluble form of the nutrient that's available to the plant. And that means if your soil is warm and if your soil is moist, nutrients will be more readily available to your plants. Once they're dissolved in soil, they're in ionic form. This is a lot of science terms. We'll get more into dirt later. But the cation exchange capacity is the soil's ability to hold on to those specific ions. Nutrients are usually positively charged, and soil is usually a little negatively charged. So how negatively charged the soil is equivalent to the cation exchange capacity. So a more negatively charged soil will be able to hold on to nutrients better, except nitrate, which is the form of nitrogen that's available in soil. It's slightly negatively charged, which is why nitrogen moves so quickly through soil, because the soil is also negatively charged, so it won't hold on super well. So you can see if your soil is more clay or more organic matter in it, it will be more negatively charged and it will be able to hold on to those nutrients better. Another thing you want to think about in your soil is the pH. So pH goes from 0 to 14, and pH is acidic from 0 to 7. It's neutral around 6 to 7 or 6 to 8. And then it's basic or alkaline from 7 to 14. This is important because different nitrogens or different nutrients are available in different capacities depending on the pH of the soil. So most things are most available when the soil is neutral. So between 7 and 8, you can see the band of nitrogen gets bigger. The band of phosphorus is bigger. Potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, and molybdenum, which I never think about, and you shouldn't have to either. But that means that if your soil is between 7 and 8, those nutrients will be available. But if you have a really, really acidic soil, even if nitrogen is present in the soil, it may not be available to the plant because your soil doesn't have the pH to make it available. So most soils are going to be neutral in this area. Some are tending slightly alkaline. But if you have a soil that falls outside of that regular pH, you might want to think about adjusting it so that the nutrients are available. The only thing that really likes acidic soil is blueberries. So if you have really acidic soil, grow blueberries. But if you have regular soil, don't grow blueberries. And the way you figure out what is available in your soil is usually through a soil test. You can get these if you look up just soil test in your area. Usually our extension services offer them, or the Soil and Water Conservation District offer them. Usually we recommend that you soil test at least the first year that you're gardening and then every couple years. So if things change in the garden, depending on what you're adding into it, you can track those changes. And they'll usually tell you the pH, the different levels of nutrients. You can also test for lead. So especially if you're working on a site that has like a history of manufacturing, or maybe a building from before the 1960s was demolished on it, you may want to check for lead and see if lead is present in your soil. And then the soil test will often include recommendations for amendments. So if you have not a lot of nitrogen available, or if you're low on calcium, they might tell you what fertilizer to apply or what to add into it. So you can see this one shows that you need to apply this fertilizer and it needs additional organic matter. So you can get a soil test and get all that information presented to you. That's a lot of information and a lot of science. The things that I usually pay attention to in my garden is nitrogen. Because nitrogen is highly mobile and moves through the soil really quickly, that's probably what you're going to be deficient in if you're deficient in anything. Nitrogen helps plants form new tissue. So deficiencies usually look like yellowing leaves and reduced growth. So if you don't have a lot of nitrogen in your soil, your plants aren't going to grow very much and they're going to be pretty yellow. So, and then phosphorus. Phosphorus helps with root formation and with bud and flower set. So if you don't have a lot of fruit on things that should be fruiting, like your tomatoes, like your peppers, like your cucumbers, you may be low in phosphorus. And then calcium, I point out specifically because calcium leads to a very specific issue in tomatoes called blossom end rot, where the end of the tomato starts to rot. And that is specifically due to a calcium deficiency. It can also be due to inconsistent watering. But if you are watering your tomatoes consistently and you have this issue, it's because you don't have enough calcium in your soil. So if you're having issues with your plants, if they are turning yellow, if they are not growing as much as you like, if you have blossom end rot, you can add nutrition into your soil. Um, there's two types broadly. There's organic ways of adding nutrition, and there's inorganic. And you can buy both in the store. So I think that's a misconception that organic, you're only getting like out in nature. You can buy organic fertilizer in the soil. But mostly what I'm doing in my own garden is using things that are free to fertilize my soil. So organic options are plant or animal-based products that are either an end product or a byproduct of naturally occurring processes. So that looks like your compost that comes from your food waste, your leaf mulch, manure, grass clippings, eggshells. You can add all of these things into your garden to add fertility. And each of these things will have different levels of nutrients, of nitrogen, of phosphorus, of calcium. Eggshells in particular are a great source of calcium. So if you're growing tomatoes, they're wonderful to add in. Things like banana peels are great for phosphorus. So you can also check like, oh, if I have a specific deficiency in a nutrient, you can look up what an organic source of that deficiency might be. They're usually slow release, so it'll take a couple weeks or a season for you to see the change in the soil. But they're also better resource use. So a lot of these things are waste products, food waste especially. We put a lot of food waste in our dumps in America, and instead we can turn it into nutrition for our gardens. Same thing with manure. That's always a waste product in agriculture that's primarily animal focused. Grass clippings are a waste product. Eggshells are a waste product. So these are all things that you can remove from your dump and instead use in your garden. If you'd prefer to go the inorganic route, they're usually manufactured like in a lab, and they're just fertilizer bags that you get from the grocery store. The one plus there is that they're often quick release, which can also be a downside I will talk about. But if you want to see results in like 2 days, you can apply an inorganic fertilizer because it's made in a form that will be readily available to the plants really quickly. Inorganic fertilizers, because they are so readily available to plants, they can also be washed away really easily. This has been a big issue we've been seeing along agricultural sites, is that high levels of phosphorus in an inorganic matter will wash off in the rainwater into our drain systems. Those will go into water sources, and then they cause algae blooms, which then cause dead spots in our water sources. So if you are applying inorganic fertilizers, you do need to be really careful about how much you're using and when you're using it, so that you don't cause environmental damage. So anytime you are buying an inorganic fertilizer or an organic fertilizer, make sure you read the label. It is actually in the law that if you are buying a fertilizer, it is your responsibility to read the label. Everything that you need to know is on there. And if you apply it incorrectly, you would be the one liable, not the company, for applying it incorrectly. So that's a really important takeaway for using inorganic fertilizers. If you do go this route, you'll see that most of them have 3 numbers in a row. That's the NPK, so the nitrogen, the potassium, and the phosphorus. And it'll show you what amounts it is. So this one is really high in phosphorus and low in potassium and nitrogen. So depending on what your deficiencies are, you may be applying a different formulation. So if you are over applying fertilizer, you may have what's called fertilizer burn. Fertilizers are usually applied as like salts of plant nutrients. So salts will naturally draw water in. So if you're placing your fertilizer too close to your plants, or if you're over fertilizing, they will actually draw water out of the root system and cause damage to your plants. This may kill your plants if your plants are very new. If they're more established, it'll just cause some damage. So if you are applying nitrogen heavy fertilizers, especially, you want to be careful to not over apply and to not apply too close to the base of plants. If you are applying store-bought fertilizers, they usually come in like 2 forms. One is a soluble form that you would spray, like diluted in water, or a dry fertilizer that you would put down and then you need to water it in. You can do banding or side dressing, which means you make a little furrow next to the plant you're trying to add nutrient to, and then you would add it into the furrow. Or you can do broadcasting, where you just apply it over the whole growing area. Or you can spray like this top picture. There's so many options for organic fertilizers. We use leaf mulch, compost, which increases your cation exchange capacity, food waste, which you can apply in bands next to your plant that you're trying to grow, worm castings, fish emulsion, great option. It will smell like fish, so just a heads up there if you're using a public garden or if you don't want your garden to smell like fish for a little bit. Manure, grass clippings we'll talk about because they're also a great source of mulch, and then garden debris. These are all options for you to add organic sources of nutrition into your garden. Animal manure is one you want to pay attention to. It is low in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are the macronutrients, but it is high in a lot of micronutrients. So if you're missing a lot of those like trace nutrients, manure may be a great option. You don't generally want to use it fresh because it has potential for disease and there's potential for fertilizer burn. So if you are using manure, I would recommend applying in the fall when your garden season's done, and then over the winter it'll break down and then your garden will be safe to grow in the spring. Or you can use aged manure. So especially if you're getting manure from like someone who has pigs or chickens, you can ask them how long the manure has been sitting. And if it's been sitting for more than a year, then it's safe to use immediately in the garden. If it's like very fresh, you may want it to sit for a little bit. So our approach out at Unity Gardens is we just use good soil health practices. So we keep as much organic matter in the garden as we can. So at the end of the year, instead of pulling all the plants out, we'll just tamp them down and then we'll add leaves and mulch on top. We rotate our crops so that the crops are drawing different nutrients out of each spot. And then we'll use cover crops. We don't use a ton of cover crops because we maximize our growing season, but you can use cover crops to keep the soil covered and add nutrition throughout the winter. So that was a lot on soil nutrition. We're going to move on to weed control. And if you have any questions about soil nutrition, hold them and we'll take them at the end. So weeds, there is no botanical definition of a weed. If you identify a plant and you ask someone whether or not it's a weed, you will get different answers depending on who you're talking to. Because a weed is just anything you don't want growing in your garden. So you define what a weed is. So many plants that are considered weeds to some people are edible or medicinal or provide value in some way. So like dandelions are a great example. A lot of people pull them out of their yards, they'll pull them out of their garden, but the dandelion is completely edible. The flowers attract bees early on. They have taproots, so they're really great at preventing erosion and moving nutrition further down into the soil. So I don't think dandelions are a weed, but if you ask someone else, they would almost definitely say yes. So that's just my disclaimer on what a weed is. But generally, you don't want a lot of weeds. For one thing, they're mostly competing with whatever you want growing. So they're taking up space, they're taking up nutrients to grow, and directly competing with whatever your food crop was. So you can see in this bed, still is a row of kale at the far edge, but the grass, the lamb's quarter, all these weeds have moved in and taken over. So they probably choked out whatever was planted in the rest of the bed, and now they're working on choking out the kale. So this is not ideal for any gardener, and this is probably the most common issue you're going to run into with garden maintenance. So my first tip for avoiding weeds is to avoid bare ground. So if you have any bare ground in your soil, nature will fill it for you if you don't fill it yourself. So if you cover with wood mulch, there's no bare ground for the weeds to take place in. And then my biggest tip there is to space your plants. So when your plants are at their mature size, there's no blank space in between them. So if you're leaving a huge amount of space between your plants, it's going to be filled with weeds, and then they will encroach on your plants. But if you don't give them any bare space to grow, they won't be able to take a foothold. Pole weeds, especially ones that are problematic and spread really easily. If you are going to use herbicides, make sure you're reading the label. Everything we talked about with fertilizers applies with herbicides as well. One of the things that we do to prevent weeds is we mulch with grass clippings. They are a great source of nitrogen, so if you're mulching with grass clippings, you'll almost never be deficient in nitrogen. They smother weeds really, really well. Same with cardboard and mulch. Those are great things to use to mulch so that you smother your weeds. We apply about 2 to 3 inches thick, so thick enough that you can't see the ground beneath it, but not much thicker than that. It will give your plants fertilizer burn because it is such a high source of nitrogen, so you don't want it touching the plants that you want to grow. You want to leave kind of a little barrier between them. And you don't want to take grass clippings that are from treated lawns or lawns that have like weeds in them that are going to seed, because then you're just going to be spreading weed seed. There's a lot of other mulch options. You can use wood chips, which you can get for free from organic resources. You can use leaf mulch. You can use plastic, like this bottom picture. A lot of commercial farmers do this, and then they'll reuse the plastic from year to year. You can use pine needles. You can use straw. You may have to reapply throughout the growing season, especially if you're using something like mulch or grass clippings because it'll break down. My mom used to use rugs that she'd get off the side of the road because they hold up and they will smother the weeds beneath them. So there's a lot of options. Whatever blocks sun from getting to the soil and removes the bare dirt aspect of it will be good at mulching. I would stay away from anything that's inorganic that breaks down really easily. So, like flimsy plastics or rubber mulch or landscape cloth, they will break down pretty quickly, and then you'll just be pulling bits of plastic out of your soil for a long time. Or it'll break down into microplastics and be present in your food, which we'd love to avoid. If you're pulling weeds, you can use a hula hoe or a regular hoe or a cultivator for baby weeds. And the idea there is that you're just going underneath the surface level and cutting off those roots before the plant has a chance to establish itself. If you do it when the soil is wet, the weeds will just reroot themselves. So you want to do it when it's dry out. You can also hand pull bigger weeds. That's mostly what I do. The more you get the roots out, the less likely that weed is to return. And that's especially true for really like tenacious weeds like poison ivy or mint or bindweed. And if you really want to get into fun garden tools, you can also use a flame cultivator. So that's that picture on the left. You can use fire to kill your weeds. It doesn't work like super well on established weeds, but it is really useful if you're preparing a bed. You can like water it and then let the weeds sprout and use the flame cultivator and then seed into it. So can be fun. You really want to make sure you pull weeds before they seed. So if you see a seed head starting to develop, that's when you want to like get out into your garden and really pull those things. So here's a few different examples of common weeds in the area. Amaranth, and like I said, a lot of these may not be weeds because amaranth is an ancient grain, so the seed heads used to be ground up for flour. Lamb's quarter is an entirely edible plant. You can also use it for flour. You can use it for spinach greens. But they are very, very invasive. They will spread everywhere. So I always pull these in my garden, and especially if they're going to seed, because if you let them seed, you will now have thousands of baby lamb's quarter, baby amaranth that will start popping up. And seeds stay viable in soil for a pretty long time. So once you let it go to seed once, you'll be dealing with that weed probably for another 5 years. Poison hemlock is one of the weeds I wanted to flag for you because it is very common for this area, but it is kind of dangerous. So it looks like carrot, and it can burn your skin if you handle it without gloves. And it is very poisonous to ingest. So don't eat it. Definitely don't eat it. Don't eat anything that you can't positively identify. But this is one that you want to have gloves on, even if you're just pulling it. It looks really similar to Queen Anne's lace if you're familiar with that one, but it also looks really similar to carrot if you've grown carrots before. The difference between Queen Anne's lace and poison hemlock is that the stem will be hairless, and it's spotted with purple or entirely purple. So that's the big difference between carrot and wild carrot and poison hemlock. It's a biennial, so it'll take 2 years to complete its life cycle. So in the fall, I'll usually see them growing really flat to the ground. And then in the spring, they'll start sending up the shoot and going to flower. So if you see this guy in your garden, definitely pull it. The seeds stay viable for up to like 7 years. So you really want to pull it before it flowers. But you want to make sure you're wearing gloves when you're pulling it. Same thing with poison ivy, which is also common in this area. Leaves of 3, leave it be is a good indicator for poison ivy, but there are some other edible things that have 3 leaves like strawberries and raspberries. So some of the other indicators that it may be poison ivy is that it's a vine, and the 2 bottom leaves will be really close together, like immediately attached to the stem, and that 3rd leaf will have a little short petiole, which is that little stalk. So that's a good indicator for poison ivy. Often it will also have a red dot at the middle of where all of those leaves join together. And I think the leaves kind of look a little bit like mittens. So if that helps you remember that it's poison ivy, wonderful. But if you see that, you also want to wear gloves when you pull it because the oil will give you a rash and make your skin itch. And that goes for the leaves as well as the root systems. So I have made that mistake before and gotten a lot of poison ivy. So make sure you're wearing gloves and covered up if you're pulling this guy. All right, now we're going to move on to watering. So, rules of thumb for watering your garden: watering deeply less often is better than watering shallowly more often. And the reason for this is because it will encourage the roots of your plants to grow down and establish better root systems. So I usually water about 1 to 1.5 inches per week. If you get a lot of rainfall, you may not need to water. And if your plants are more mature, for one thing, their roots are deeper, so they can seek out water deeper in the soil. But they're also probably shading out the ground beneath it and keeping water in the soil rather than having it evaporate out. If you are relying on rainfall and you're not sure how much, rainfall is really, really regional. So, like, you could have a hugely different amount of rain at your neighbor's house down the road than you do at your own house. So, if you're not at your house a lot, and if you work a couple miles away, you'll probably receive different amounts of rainfall at your house. So, it's great to have a rain gauge that will tell you how much water you received. A lot of people like using moisture meters. You just stick it in the ground and they'll tell you whether or not it's moist. I found that they like are kind of temperamental, and if you leave them in the soil, they'll rust and mess with the reading. So if you do want to use one of those, make sure you take it inside after you use it so it doesn't rust. But you probably can just stick your finger in the soil, and if you feel moisture, you don't need to water. So up to you whether or not you want to rely on that one. I tend to stay away from it. There are a lot of options for irrigation. The one that most farmers will use because it's the most efficient is drip. It puts the water right next to your crop. It's not spraying into the air, so it's not watering any weeds, and it's not evaporating as it sprays into the air. You can set it for a timer for regular watering. You can put it underneath mulch. You can put it underneath plastic. Um, I think it can be kind of irritating to set up because you need to make sure that it's sitting completely flat and completely correctly. Otherwise, it won't be watering what you want to water it. And it can be prone to leaks and bursts. So if you are doing this, it's important to make sure that you are checking in on it to make sure it's watering correctly rather than setting it up once and not checking on it for the whole season. It is also the most expensive to set up, but if you have a bigger system and you don't have as much time to check on it, this may be a good route for you. Soaker hoses are kind of similar to drip in that they will put the water directly at the soil level. They will have a shorter lifespan than a regular hose just because of all of the holes in it. It won't last as long, but you can lay it using landscape staples and just lay it next to the plants that you want to water. And that's another good system for being water efficient and not having to stand there for a while hand watering. Overhead sprinklers is mostly what we use at Unity Gardens. I think they're the cheapest to set up and the easiest to monitor because you can see the water moving. So when you turn on your sprinkler and if it doesn't turn on, you know you have an issue. Whereas with drip, you may not notice for a little bit. You will lose some water to evaporation. So it is best to water either in the morning or in the evening when the sun isn't strong. And it will also water everything in the area. So it may water outside your garden area, it may water the weeds, and it can kind of splash and spread disease issues. So if you have things like grapes or squash that are prone to mildew issues, you may want to stay away from sprinklers. And then hand watering is probably like one of the more efficient uses of water because you're out there, you know exactly what's getting watered, but it is the most time consuming. I think the pro is that it keeps you out in your garden, so you're paying attention to your plants, and that keeps you paying attention to any issues that are going on. So you'll see bugs, you'll see diseases, you'll see, oh, this is ready to harvest if you're out there hand watering every day. So it is what I like to recommend to beginner gardeners because it just keeps you involved. And it's very straightforward. It's hard to mess up hand watering. Some people like to use rain barrels. The benefit is that it will reroute rainwater from your sewer system and you will get water for free because it's from nature. Um, it is not potable. So, especially a lot of rain barrel systems are set up to catch where rainwater is diverted. So, off of rooftops, off of maybe like garages. That is also where birds might poop. So, you don't necessarily want to use the water that's coming off of your roof for washing your produce or using in your kitchen, but you can use it to irrigate things. You want to put it close to whatever you're trying to water so that you don't have to lug the water a long way. And if you want to use gravity to kind of give you some water pressure, you'll have to elevate it. So this one's sitting right on the ground, which is not ideal. You can put it up on some cinder blocks to increase gravity and get better water pressure out of it. This is a more intense slide about rain barrels. You can look into extension sites to get a better system idea of it. But once you set them up, they're pretty easy to maintain. You'll just fully empty and clean it in the fall, and you'll have something to divert the rainwater from your roof. You have your rain barrel, you have a screen so that you don't catch any leaves or anything in your rain barrel, and then you'll have a spout to send out your water. And a lot of them have an overflow. So at the top, you see the second hose. That's if this rain barrel starts filling up, it'll bring the water to a secondary location. Sometimes another rain barrel, sometimes like a rain garden, somewhere where a lot of water can be stored. So, last section on harvest. Fruiting plants will always produce more if you harvest more often. So you can see that this was probably a pepper at one point in time. When you don't harvest and you let your plants produce fruit that just sits there for a while, it signals to the plant that, okay, I have seeds that are ready to go, and it'll slow its production. So this is especially true of like beans, peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, anything that fruits. Rotting also invites pests and diseases into your garden. So this is more likely to spread disease than if you were continually harvesting stuff off of it. And if you leave your fruit too long in the garden that is ripe, your squirrels and your bunnies may get to it before you do. Recognizing when to harvest is important. So if you're doing stuff from seed, you can look at your seed packet and see where it says days to harvest and just mark that out on your calendar. So often, say if you're growing zucchini and you look at the seed packet, it'll say, oh, matures in 70 days. And then you can put down the day that you seeded it, count 70 days out, mark in your calendar, and just know to check around that time. But you can also just walk your garden and check on things and see what is ready to pluck. So some of the stuff that is harder to recognize, in my opinion, are eggplants and watermelon. Eggplant, if you press into the skin and it pops back up immediately, it's not quite ready. And you can also go based on size. So when it gets to a size you like, it's more likely, or a size that it should be based on the seed packet is more likely to be ready. Watermelon will get a yellow spot on the bottom when they've been sitting for long enough. And if there's a lot of like scratches on the outside, the insects know that it's ready because they can smell the sugar. So, so if your watermelon's kind of beat up, it's probably ripe. Things like tomatoes will continue ripening after you take it off the vine. So this tomato is blushing on the bottom. So if you take it off now, it will continue to ripen on your counter and it will signal to your plant to keep producing. Things like zucchini and beans, you can pick at any size and they'll still be good. I like picking my zucchini when they're a little bit smaller instead of getting like the giant boat zucchinis, but you can use them truly at any size. And then things like herbs and greens, you want to harvest often because otherwise they will start to produce flowers, and that's called bolting. So you can see this basil is starting to produce little flowers, and that will take energy away from the leaves and put it towards the seed production. So your basil won't taste as good once it starts bolting. So if you harvest often, it'll slow down the bolting process. You want to make sure if anything looks sad or weird in your garden, you're just removing it. So dead or diseased leaves, you just want to clip those off and take them out of your garden. If you have compost, you can put them in your compost, but only if your compost heats up. If your compost doesn't heat up a lot, it won't necessarily kill the disease that affected your plants. And then an important part of garden maintenance is to invite pollinators into your garden so that they can help pollinate your fruits. First step is to provide water. So depending on what you're inviting into your garden, it'll look different. Usually people are excited about bees. So bees need a water source, but they are very small. So you can't put out a bird bath for your bees because they won't be able to access it. So usually a shallow dish with some rocks in it, and then you keep water available in it. And the bees, you can see, are very happy to sit on the rocks and access the water that way. If you have something like, if you want to attract more birds into the garden, a bird bath is great. If you want to attract bats who are really good at controlling like moth pests, you need, I think about 7 feet of water in a trench because they drink as they're flying, which is super cool. So a bird bath or a bee waterer won't work for a bat, but you can put in a trough for them. A lot of our native bees, so I think 70% of them nest in the ground. So you want to leave a single bare spot for your native bees to nest, especially over winter. And then a really important part is to have continual blooms. So you want to have something blooming in your garden from spring all the way to fall. If you're choosing to do a lot of blooms, highly recommend that you choose some natives. So if you're curious about integrating more natives, you can check out South Bend Wild Ones website. They have a brochure on there with some like really good recommended starter plants for natives. and they'll tell you like, here's one that blooms in the spring, here's one that blooms in the summer, and here's one that blooms in the fall, so that you have blooms available for the full season for your pollinators. Because if you're not providing habitat for them, if you're not filling their food needs or their water needs or their shelter needs, they're going to go somewhere else that does. So you need to make sure you're fulfilling those three things so that they stay in your garden. If you want a lot of insects in your garden, which I heavily recommend for pollinators and for beneficial insects, avoid just using insecticides. And if you really decide you need to use insecticides, don't spray when there are active blooms, because that's when your pollinators are out and active. And you want to leave a mess in your garden. So a lot of our bees that don't live in the ground will live in like cavities. So if you have things like coneflower or raspberries or zinnias, they have hollow stems and the bees will nest in those over winter. So you want to leave those stems up until the weather is consistently above 50 degrees in the spring. And then you can take those down because the pollinators will have left hibernation. I also wanted to flag, if you want to learn more stuff about growing or if you just want to get more involved in the garden, these are the programs that are currently going at Unity Gardens for the summer. So we have a kids summer garden club in June on Fridays. We're doing yoga in the garden every Tuesday starting in May and going until the end of August. I will be teaching a garden growing series in July on Mondays about growing specific things. And then we'll be doing lunch and learns on how to use what is available in the garden in your kitchen on Saturdays. And then we're also doing a pruning workshop if you're interested in fruit trees and how to prune those. So any questions?
So, Katie, I think there were a couple of questions in the chat box, but every time I go to the chat box, I get kicked off the internet. So
Oh, okay. I
I
will look
don't
at the
know
chat
what's
box.
going on, but look at the chat box.
How do you add nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium? So I would say the best way to add nutrition into your garden is just to use straight up compost, because that's broken down food scraps and it'll be a variety of different organic matter that's broken down. So there will be a variety of nutrients available in it. So I think that's the easiest way to do it. If you're not sure what you're deficient in, you could also just get a soil test and see what they recommend. Often they'll either recommend adding organic matter like compost, or they'll recommend a fertilizer that you can use. Or you can also see like if you're deficient in something specific like calcium, you can add eggshells. Or if you're deficient in potassium, you can add banana peels. So you can look up what you're deficient in and just kind of add based on that. Let's see, what were others? Yes, newspaper is also a great thing to mulch with. So thank you to Beth for sharing that. Any other questions that we didn't touch on? I think next time we'll be talking about composting. And then I have a few people here. Any questions from the studio audience?
That's great.
No, I think we're all set.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Katie. I have so many things that resonated with me. I love the idea of the rain gauge and the moisture meters. I believe Purdue Extension can do the soil testing to know what's in your soil. And I don't know if there's a charge to that. Do you know, Katie?
There usually is. I think the soil test that they'll usually recommend is about $25.
Okay.
But I really recommend it if you're doing a garden for the first time, just to know what's in your soil, especially if you don't know your site history and you're worried there may be lead.
Sure.
Definitely do some lead testing.
Okay, that's great. And then those people that want to have more pollinators and perhaps with Indiana natives, South Bend Wild Ones website is a great resource, right? And
Yeah,
then,
I'll put that in the chat.
okay, great. And then, wow, all the Unity Garden offerings coming up. You guys are really busy, busy bees, right? And then I want to just mention real quickly that during our last session, Emily Evers with Purdue, she couldn't be here today with the Purdue Extension, offered to connect are participants with master gardeners. And several people reached out to Emily, and Emily was able to connect them with master gardeners. So I just wanted to, even though Emily isn't here, give her a shout out. Make sure everybody that is here today knows that that's still an option. You would get in touch with Emily. And then, as always, we will send out all the resources, and there'll be a follow up slide from Purdue Extension about some upcoming things, farm to school, as well as we'll make sure Emily Evers' information is included in the follow-up email, as well as what I'm going to share today. So any other questions for Katie before we segue into activities for preschoolers?
I'm just going to put the wild ones brochure of those starter native
Nice.
plants. And then I'll also put the upcoming events with Unity Gardens in the chat. And then we'll share the
Oh,
slides from this afterwards.
great. That's wonderful. Real quickly, I want to thank or I want to introduce Madeline Alford, who is Ready to Grow's intern for the summer. She's actually been working with Ready to Grow since December with our South Bend Quality Improvement Grants. Madeline, who is a rising senior at Notre Dame, has a nice early childhood experiential background, having spent a lot of time at ECDC, and was even a volleyball coach with our school agers a couple of summers in a row. But anyway, so watch for emails, not only from me, but also from Madeline. And then I believe that Madeline is going to share my slideshow. I'm afraid to touch anything. I don't want to be knocked off. So Madeline is going to go to full screen and we're going to get busy with activities. Okay, so as she's figuring that out, uh, and sometimes things are quirky, so it may not work out, but we will see. So when I first began to think about gardening with preschoolers, it was my first summer, and I was a novice with gardening with preschoolers. The pressing question that was on my mind is what are we going to do from the time we get all our seeds and seedlings into the ground? What are we going to do until it's time to harvest besides water? And because we used mulch to control the weeds, we didn't have any weeding to do. So what we were going to do, and then the other pressing question on my mind was what format would be best for sharing all the activities that I wanted to share around gardening and nature while fostering a love of gardening and nature through diverse connections with natural items and natural processes. So, with that said, I also, in the back of my mind, knew that there'd be some ozone days that we couldn't get outside, and there'd be some high temperature days. So, I had to also plan for some inside activities for extreme heat or inclement weather. And then my love for designing integrated hands-on, inquiry-based, developmentally appropriate curriculum spurred the creation of the gardening and nature activities that I will be sharing with you today. And also on June 20th. We won't be able to get through all of this, but we will make sure that you receive all the resources, including some of the information we won't discuss yet today, because we know it's time to get these activities going with children as seeds and seedlings are getting into the ground. And then it's what are we going to do next? So Madeline is going to drop into the chat box near the end of this session the resource that has everything from insect breathing to for mindfulness, has some songs and finger plays. It has 6 storybooks with involved integrated lesson plans included. So there's a lot we're going to share with you yet today in a resource. And we'll also put that in the follow-up. Okay, so let's dig in. I want to share that I have used all of these storybooks and all of the activities. So they come with an enthusiastic endorsement for their appeal to children ages 3 to 5, and actually 6 as well. I will also highlight those activities that the children were most interested in and excited about as indicated by their robust engagement by asking questions and also for repeated requests to do activities over. Okay, next slide. Here we go. Madeline, you're on it. Thanks. Um, so I guess once a teacher, always a teacher. So let's begin with some objectives for this session and June 20th session as well. So we're going to become familiar with high quality gardening and nature themed children's books, both fiction and nonfiction. We're going to explore gardening and nature storybook extension activities with hands-on inquiry-based approach. We're going to develop some curricular resources using storybooks as a launch pad for integrated curriculum and learning, all through play. Okay, slide 3. So why an integrated gardening and nature approach? Why does that excite the children and me? Well, a play-based integrated approach really nurtures the whole child's development. And that is what I've spent 50 years, I know I don't look that old, 50 years in early childhood. And I have found the entire time that our focus on the whole child is the most meaningful for growth, development, learning, and that love of learning that we want to foster. A integrated approach also provides for diverse interests and diverse abilities. It provides opportunities for emergent curriculum and also multiple intelligences. It also integrates the core um, curriculum areas, language literacy, life science, math, and creative explorations, all through play-based hands-on experiences. And I know I already mentioned it embraces an emergent curriculum approach, but we really want that wonder and curiosity to develop. And by following the children's interests and questions to guide the learning around them, they learn how to learn, not just for gardening and nature, but across the spectrum. Okay, slide 4. So I mentioned that I was really a little concerned about format when I was developing the curriculum, the gardening curriculum, my first summer, because I knew I was going to have a half day with a particular group of children of 18 or 20. And I wanted to be able to fill that half day with meaningful, developmentally appropriate curriculum. So, what I'm going to be offering today or talking about can work for a full half day, but it also is flexible enough that it could fill a full day, and it also could fill several days. So the format we're going to talk about is certainly flexible and can fit your own program situation. So I always featured a quality children's book as an anchor text for each session, embracing rich vocabulary. We know that one of the most important school readiness skills and overall developmental skills for learning is rich vocabulary. And so gardening and nature just provides that rich vocabulary through the storybooks, but also through the children's questions as we are supporting their wonder and curiosity. I always included play-based provocations using puppets, sensory play, dramatic play, and creative explorations. We always had hands-on activities such as painting with flowers or painting about flower colors, pounding, dissecting, snipping, cutting, hole punching, rubbings, connecting the senses as much as possible to the activity. We also included some creative art, as well as puzzles and games, reinforcing key concepts and vocabulary. And then garden time. This was by far the favorite. Planting, watering, harvesting, noticing, grazing, and being in and around the garden. So when I talk about grazing, one of the best ways to offer children the opportunity to actually nibble on something out of the garden before you have produce to harvest is to have herbs. And we found that chocolate mint, you have to plant it in a pot, otherwise it takes over and it becomes an invasive weed. But having chocolate mint allowed the children a leaf to be able to chew on and graze right out of the garden. And having basil did the same thing. And also rosemary for smelling. You only need a little bit and wow, the senses are going. So in terms of format, the flexibility of the format allows to modify pacing in case the time in the garden is like super intriguing that day, or it allows you to do small group, larger group, and also the depth of content based on children's ages, interests, developmental needs, and experiences. Some children want to wear gloves even when they're not in the dirt in the garden. Other children, gloves aren't necessary. And certainly you don't want to wear gloves when you're watering because nobody likes wet gloves in the summer or the winter. So, okay, next slide. So, I always tried to include some sort of a inquiry-based question, and we have a whole page of these type of questions that are just perfect for preschoolers, or a core concept that intentionally was used to create all the activities during that gardening morning. These questions might be: what do plants need to grow? What creatures spend time in the garden during the day and at night? Those two topics were by far the most popular because it allowed us to learn about everything from groundhogs and birds, as well as skunks and raccoons. So it was by far the most popular topic. How do pollinators help our plants and gardens grow? And what are the parts of the plant? Or of a flower, or a butterfly, or a spider, which we always use the word spider, which is an arachnid, so that the children learned arachnid for spiders and other insects. So again, using children's books and puppets, and I'll get into the puppets in a minute. Children's books and puppets to support language and literacy, particularly core concepts, building vocabulary. We really tried to use authentic items rather than toy items, and we blended the storybooks with the activities and play being offered. Um, Math and manipulatives, counting and sorting seeds, measuring growth, sorting vegetables and leaves, creative art, nature-based, open-ended art, loose parts designs, and I have pictures of all of these coming. And then, of course, the outdoor garden time. So that was pretty much how we organized the gardening mornings. Okay, next slide. So here are some of the preschool garden inquiry questions that I just wanted to offer, because as we think about what questions might be on the children's mind, never having these replace real questions, but it's good to have some idea what the questions are that you're focusing on to build your garden curriculum. Okay, so next slide. So here is what I've done for for 6 different storybooks to share with you how I organized my integrated gardening experiences with storybooks, play, art, games and puzzles, and time in the garden. I always started with Lola. And most of our plants, by the time we started this in June with our summer program, most of the plants were already in the garden. So we didn't plant marigolds or herbs. We waited so that the marigolds and herbs could be planted by the children once we started the gardening. Of course, the other plants that are in the garden were planted in the spring by the children, but this was like a new launch of gardening activities. So the Lola Plants a Garden is such a sweet story about planning and planting and enjoying a garden. And if you don't have this book, there's a couple of other fabulous alternatives: Planting a Rainbow, as well as The Tiny Seed and Zinnia's Flower Garden. Later on, there's an entire list of storybooks. So we would always start with a group time, and we would share the book. And then I would also share some puppets. And this was the beginning of our summer program of gardening. So I always had puppets to share each time I came to do the gardening curriculum. And then also, we did some talking through the book about the parts of a plant and what plants need to grow, talking about watering. And now we can talk about if we water too much, the roots are weak. So we have to be careful and water when needed, thanks to Katie. And then we would talk about the walk, the wait, and watch process. So when I present materials to children, I love presenting them in a way so that I can surprise them, make it sparkly with those concrete items that I'm going to share. So I always use a gardening basket that contains the objects, or even like a TJ Maxx big bag that contains the objects that I'm going to use during the story or after the story, such as the puppets or garden tools, even a small marigold plant inside the bag, or the herbs later in the summer that we're getting ready to plant. And then the basket or bag keeps these hidden. I also like to wear a story apron. I sound like a librarian here, but I love story aprons because with a story apron, you've got pockets. And I just would get from TJ Maxx a inexpensive apron that had pockets, as most do. And then I would use the pockets to hide my puppets in for that week. And so there again was this sparkly aspect. And I would sometimes have the puppet kind of peek out and then introduce themselves. So anyway, the story apron was great. And they have story aprons that have plants on them or produce on them or even herbs. So they work out great. I also mentioned that I was going to share with you some of the most loved aspects, and we only have a couple minutes left. And I wanted to share with you that I found the puppets blended with the storybooks were almost magical each time in connecting the children with the stories around the visitors that come into our garden at daytime or nighttime. And at dusk, as we'll talk about next time, as we talk about groundhogs, there are two fabulous books about groundhogs, and they like to eat at dusk. So that was a great road. Oh, thanks, Madeline. That's a great story. So then the puppets I used with gardening, the first session included Pillbug, or most lovingly called the roly-poly. We had butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, ladybugs, spider, box turtle, um, skunk, groundhog, raccoon. So much to learn about each of these garden visitors. From the roly-polies, who are good for the soil because they eat rotting plants and interestingly have three eyes and blue blood, and their skeleton covers the outside of their body. So they are a crustacean, which is so interesting. And of course, the 4 and 5-year-olds find this fascinating because they love facts. And then I simplified it for the 3-year-olds as well, learning that spiders are insects, but arachnids and have 8 legs and are pollinators too, like bees and butterflies and dragonflies, delighted the children. So looking for spider webs or any investigation exploring the garden was so much fun for the kids, whether it was a scavenger hunt, always with magnifying glasses. I cannot even emphasize enough how every time we went out into the garden, we brought our a basket of magnifying glasses because the children adored using them to find bugs, to look for blossoms, learning about tendrils, that curly thing that comes out of the cucumbers, attaching itself to a fence if available, or a structure so that it can grow up, not just down. All of those explorations in the gardens just fascinated the children. And having stepping stones in the garden so that you can walk through the garden, not just be near the garden, but actually in the garden if at all possible. That was the other thing that delighted the children. They would just loop around with their magnifying glasses. So we're there, we're at 2 o'clock. So I guess I just want to share that the resource that Madeline is going to drop into the chat box has all 6 books and the activities related to those books. And then also some other storybooks and some finger plays and songs, as well as some breathing, calm breathing. So anyway, we'll conclude for now and get back to this on June 17th. Becky Lees has shared with us a slide that I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to share without getting kicked off. Let me see if I can do it. Madeline, will you stop sharing and I'll go ahead and see if I can have this show up and then Becky can talk about this real quickly?
I think you should be able to share. I stopped sharing.
Yep, great. And Madeline, thank you. You did a fabulous job. So how does that look? Does it look like we've got it?
There
Thumbs
we
up.
go.
Can you see it? Great.
Hmm. And we'll we'll include this as well. Terry will include it, but just wanted to draw your attention in the follow-up email. There will be information on how you can order basil seeds to grow basils. And there's a curriculum that goes with it called Season Your
Nice.
Summer. It's a farm to school celebration. And it's just some information and children activities if you want to plant basil this summer and do activities with the kids. Um, so that just watch out for that. I thought that was a nice. I hadn't ever seen that us grow like a summer uh, program from Indiana Grown is normally in the fall. So this is their second annual doing Season Your Summer, and this year it features basil. So plant some basil, and the kids will have fun with it.
Yeah, and if you have a robust crop basil, you can send it home for parents. So one of the things we'll talk about the next session is also family engagement and diverse ways to engage families in your program with gardening. Thanks so much, Becky. And I don't know if Katie's still with us, but thank you to Katie for all of her uh, garden maintenance information. And I'm really eager to hear about composting. I know that many of you were as well. We'll send out a training certificate for this session in the follow-up as well. It may take just a couple of days, but we'll get all of that out to you quickly. So thank you, everyone. And our next session is June 17th at 1 o'clock. And that's our final session. Except I'd really like to schedule a few field trips in June for all of us that want to go maybe late day to Unity Gardens after work, or also to Greenbridge Growers. So we'll see what we can work out once June 17th comes and the 4-part series is over. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Katie. Thanks to all of you for coming and for your interest. Bye.
Bye.